I used to live in a small Pennsylvania town of a little over 5,000 people. Back in the early 1900s, it was a happening place to be. It sat right alongside the river and had an actual running ferry boat. It also had the railroad running through. The station was a glistening beauty of architecture and a non-stop hub of celebrities and luminaries of the time. The shops and hotels on the main street were regularly visited by them. They found the town to be a quaint distraction on their way to wherever they were going. Some would even venture up the hill to tour the haunted castle. As with all such things, times change. Railroads and ferries gave way to the convenience of cars and buses. The tourist trade all but dried up, and with it, the town changed from a glittering jewel beside the river to a pale shadow of its former glory. All of this was long before I was born. I only knew the train station in its abandoned and dilapidated form. Its only decoration was the brightly colored artistry and off-color language of graffiti. I never saw a ferry grace the waters of the river, only coal barges. As with many children who grew up in a dingy, depressed area, I made my way out into the wide world to make my fortune. But time had made me nostalgic for my hometown, even in her less than glorious form. I had acquired the hobby of urban exploring. The more I explored the dilapidated structures of distant lands, the more I thought of the abandoned buildings of my own hometown. Eventually, I took a trip back home. I didn't tell my mom I was in town. I wanted to surprise her after I was done exploring. I knew what she would say if I showed up there first and announced my plans. The same thing she always said. "Why do you want to break into those old buildings?" she would ask. "Aside from being dangerous, it's illegal." I did what I wanted to first, to avoid the argument. Looking back, I really wish I had heeded her advice. Maybe I would have saved myself the pain, both physical and mental, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Even in its dilapidated form, the former railroad station was impressive. It was 5 stories high, which was the tallest building in town aside from the former bank, which is now a second-hand shop. The doors themselves are 2 stories high. The outside lights that are mounted to the wall are gothic and remind me of something you would see in a horror movie. I think the only reason they've escaped the hands of roaming vandals is that they're mounted 10 feet up. Even in the dead of night, I'm sure someone would notice a ladder against the wall as someone attempts to rip the light down. As for me, I decided to explore in that wonderful time between sunset and night. It gives me just enough time to see what I'm looking for and then take pictures in the fading light to make the whole scene look surreal. I got to the railroad station just as the sun was setting over the river. I paused and wondered at the beauty that can appear even in the mundane. I circled around the building twice, searching for any weaknesses where I might be able to enter. The signs posted on each side said, "Warning, this building is owned by the government and is monitored by video surveillance. No trespassing under penalty of law." The sign punctuated its point with a video camera picture that seemed to follow you wherever you went. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the outside and the windows around the back that were covered with bars in a crisscross pattern. I zoomed in and studied them, looking for a way inside. After a bit of study, I found it. One of the windows had been shattered but was still protected by the bars on the outside. I examined the bars closely and found the screws that held them were only interrotted wood. I pulled out my small crowbar and soon I was able to squeeze inside. Once in, I found myself transported to a different world. The once opulent decorations were now detritus on the floor, but the walls themselves were covered in brightly colored pinstriped wallpaper. I carefully stepped through the room and into the next. My footsteps echoed back to me, causing me to turn and see who had followed me inside. Convinced that it was my own feet making the sound, I continued. This room was covered in the greenest design I'd ever seen. I remembered watching a documentary about old wallpaper they used to make that used arsenic to create the amazing shade of green. And now I found myself face to face with it. I wondered at the deadly beauty and if I should be breathing in the presence of the poison. I exited the opulent room and found myself in the foyer. I had only ever seen this room from the outside. The hastily glimpsed marble staircase could not compare to standing at the base of the winding stairs and looking up. I took a few more pics with my phone, knowing they could never do it justice. On my way to the stairs, I glanced over at the elevator. I pried open the doors and found only an empty elevator shaft. I looked down into impenetrable darkness. I shone my phone light down, but still couldn't see the bottom. I shone it up and saw the underside of the car suspended several floors above. I stepped back into the lobby and refocused on the stairs. I began my upward trek by brushing away stones and other detritus so I wouldn't stumble. I froze and threw myself against the wall when a car stopped right in front of the building and a light shone inside. I held my breath as the light tracked along the wall heading toward me. It stopped as the railing blocked the light from shining on me. I stayed plastered against the wall as if trying to become a part of the building and invisible to the searcher. After a long moment, the light vanished. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued up the stairs. On the second floor, I was surprised to find the ticket counter still in reasonably good shape. The wooden counter was still intact with its deep brown stain, and the bar still guarded the ticket attendants. It felt eerie as if I could walk right up and ask for a ticket, and perhaps the ghost of an attendant would step up and hand me one. One of the things I felt was odd about the room was its temperature. It was hot outside. The high for the day had been 90 degrees, and yet here inside this abandoned building with no air conditioning, I was nearly shivering. I left the ticket counter behind and continued up the stairs. They had transformed from opulent marble to functional concrete and steel for the journey to the next level. The wooden rail on top of the metal base was sturdy enough to keep me from stumbling. The next floor held a surprise. I stepped up into what was once a fully functioning hair salon. The row of hair dryers built into seats greeted me, and the counter still held scissors and other hairstyling tools. The 10-foot-long mirror was still attached to the wall. Its mounts clawed tenuously, gripping the glass in terror of letting go. I dared not touch it for fear of it collapsing. Even through the decay, I could still see the opulence in this room. In my mind's eye, I saw the chairs full of ladies waiting for their hair to dry while they waited for their train to arrive. Working to keep my presence as minimal as possible, I took a few pictures and continued to the next floor. The fourth floor contained offices. File cabinets were half open with papers strewn about as if someone had either broke in or left in a hurry. I wondered at the mess and how long ago it had been made. That's when I heard the first sound. It wasn't wood creaking under my feet or any other noise I'd been making. It was something different. I stepped away from the ransacked office and started down the hallway. Open doors on the left and right greeted me with rooms full of turn-of-the-century furniture. It was as if someone had made these rooms into a storehouse for the rest of the floor. What little light that had drifted in through the uncovered windows was fading quickly. I was now completely dependent on my phone to light the way. Shadows crept into the hallway where the light was unable to fight them off. What was once a long corridor had turned into a cavern of darkness. The light was only strong enough to penetrate a few feet in front of me. I contemplated turning around and abandoning my adventure. The last doorway loomed barely visible at the end of the hall. I hesitated as I approached and put my hand to the knob. It felt unnaturally cold as if warning me of what lay inside. My curiosity turned the knob before I could object. The door slowly creaked open, making the exact same sound you hear in every horror movie. It was deafening and terrifying as it shattered the silence. The room looked like any of the other rooms I'd been in as I hurriedly flashed the light around looking for danger. The only difference was there was a large machine in the middle of the room. It was square at its base and tall like a phone booth. Cold air was pouring off it. There were 8 silver flex hoses like the hose for a dryer vent attached to it and leading away, making the machine resemble a robotic octopus. The strange thing was I didn't see any power wires leading to it. Usually, a commercial air conditioner like this used a substantial amount of power. There also didn't seem to be any visible controls. The entire machine was smooth. I heard the sound again. It wasn't anything I could easily identify. The closest I could come would be an insect chitter. Only this sounded quite loud. The insect would have either been right beside my ear or very large. I swatted my ears and found nothing there. My brain began buzzing, like I was standing in the middle of 1,000 beehives. Visions assaulted my mind. Stars, earth, falling, an explosion. Lights, hundreds of men in suits pointing things at me, things that hurt. The inside of my metal prison. I suddenly understood. There was a creature inside the metal box. It was giving off enough power to light a small city. I looked at the metal box again, only this time the creature helped me see through it. It stood inside, rotting away as the power was leached from its body. I looked into its large eyes, as dark as a bottomless pit. I felt the misery of being used and never allowed to return to my own kind. It showed me what I needed to do. In the basement, there was a control box that kept the power regulated and sent it off to the power company. It showed me that the control box was in a lead-lined room, and it couldn't turn the power off itself. That's why the release to its prison was in a room so far away, so it couldn't reach. It gave me instructions. Its dark eyes somehow looked sad, as if pleading with me for help. I left the room with renewed determination. I wasn't going to let the government get away with imprisoning this creature for their own unscrupulous purposes, not if I could help it. I made my way back to the hallway and found the elevators. I pried open the doors and looked into the elevator car. I gingerly stepped one foot inside and was instantly rewarded with the sound of a cable creaking. I took a quick picture and retreated before the car ended my adventure in sudden death. I looked at the picture and saw that the controls for the elevator went G through 5, but there were 2 more buttons. One said B1 and the other was blank. I heard another sound. This one was very familiar. It was the sound of pursuit. I could hear someone breaking in several floors below. My new friend gave me a vision of a man in a suit that had broken in through the same way I had and was pursuing me. It showed me his badge and gun as well. I panicked until my friend gave me a vision of what to do. I ran down to the 3rd floor and pried open the elevator doors. Once inside, I found the rungs for the ladder that ran the whole way from the top to the bottom of the elevator shaft. I pocketed my phone and pulled the doors shut as quietly as possible, then began the downward climb. The vision of what I needed to do was so strong that I could see everything with my eyes closed. My friend guided me down into the inky blackness. When I hit the last rung, I wasn't even breathing hard. My friend was able to help me with stamina as well. I pulled out my phone, turned on my light, and opened the door that said restricted. My friend guided me through a series of lefts and rights in the damp, musty basement until I reached a large metal door that read, "No admittance." There was an electronic keypad on it. The numbers 1, 4, 2, 6 entered my mind and I punched them in. The door swung open. I stepped inside and nearly passed out as my friend's presence left me. I didn't realize how much it had been helping me until its influence was blocked. I still knew what to do. I had to look for a large handle with the number 5 on it and turn it off. I looked around the room and saw dozens of handles. I searched each one of them for the number 5 until I finally found it. I smiled and put my hand on the handle.
"Freeze!"
yelled a man in a suit, pointing a gun at me. "Do not pull that handle or I will fire. Slowly back away." I put my hands up and did as he said. "You should be ashamed of torturing a poor innocent creature like that to get free power," I said. The man chuckled. It was only then I noticed he was wearing a small helmet. It was barely more than a beanie. "So that's the ruse it's using now?" he said. "What ruse?" "That it's being held captive against its will, and we are some horrible people who are using it for some heinous reason?" "You are," I said. "How long has it been a prisoner?" "Not long enough, apparently," he said. "I'll tell you what, kid. I'll prove it to you." "How are you going to do that?" "Step out here," he said, backing out of the room. He backed a good 10 feet away from the door and holstered his gun. "There, kid," he said. "Just step out of the door and I won't try anything." I slowly made my way to the edge of the doorway, hesitating as I contemplated what trick he might be pulling, then stepped through the door. I had barely made it through the doorway when my mind was assaulted. I grabbed my head and collapsed to the floor as the creature sent images flooding into my brain. Anger, raw fury that I had failed to pull the switch. Visions of me rushing the agent, grabbing his gun, and shooting him full of holes, then running back into the room and turning off the switch. My head felt like it was going to explode as my legs involuntarily lifted me off the floor and threw me back inside the room. The last thing that went through my mind before the commands of the thing I called my friend were silenced was the thought of my own arms ripping my body to pieces if I failed. I collapsed to the floor, breathing hard. Blood was flowing from my nose. I didn't know if it was from falling or from the psychic overload placed on my brain by the monster that was my puppet master. The man had re-entered the room. "Now do you understand?" "Not completely," I said. "Why can't it control you?" He tapped the helmet on his head. "It blocks all of its transmissions. Do you happen to have another one of those?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a beanie and tossed it to me. I put it on, wondering if I hadn't traded one form of mind control for another. "Let me guess," he said. It showed you a vision of a bunch of agents surrounding it. Yes. All of those agents are dead, he said. That creature killed them all in such a brutal and disgusting way before we were able to capture it. But if these hats are able to shield us from its influence, why didn't the metal box it was in protect me? You misunderstand, he said. The box was meant to keep it immobile. It was never a power generator. The lines that enter the box are meant to keep it at a temperature where its brain functions go dormant. It takes an incredible amount of energy to keep it under control. So, it lied to me. You and many others. But why keep it here in an abandoned building? Believe it or not, this is the safest place. It's away from others. People don't even bother with or notice the building. At least most people. I smiled sheepishly and shrugged. So, what happens to me now? That depends, he said. On what? On if you can stay away from here and every other so-called abandoned place. Are there more creatures being contained in other buildings? Can you keep a secret? Yes. So can I, he said. I waited for more of an answer. After a minute, I understood. All right, I get it, I said. Does that mean I can leave? He stared at me for a long moment. Get the hell out of here, he said, aiming his thumb over his shoulder. And don't let me see you anywhere near here again. I started for the door. What'll you do? I said. Fix this containment unit before it pulls in another idiot like you, he said. I hesitantly stepped through the door. My mind wasn't assaulted like the last time, but I was sure I could still hear a faint echo of someone screaming that I had failed and would be punished. I felt my hand curling into a fist. I had to fight to keep from pummeling myself. I got in the car and drove as fast as I could away from my hometown. After I was a few miles away, the echo faded and my fist uncurled. Only when I had made it safely home did I dare take off the beanie. I hesitated at first, but once it was off, I didn't hear any thoughts that weren't my own. I breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time I worried. I didn't know how many of those things were out there hidden among the detritus of modern life, just waiting for someone unwary like me to unleash a monster. As I slept, in the far recesses of my mind that don't show themselves in the light of day, a thought intruded itself into my own. Release me.